They say the dirt of South Carolina holds onto its secrets, but it doesn't hold a candle to the greed of a woman who didn't earn a single grain of it. I'm 72 years old, and for 50 of those years, I've watched the sunrise over the east pasture of the Miller estate. My husband, rest his soul, bled for this land. My son, Silas, lived for it. When Silas passed away 4 months ago, I thought my biggest heartbreak was behind me. I was wrong. The real nightmare didn't have a funeral. It had a sold sign and a smirk. It started on a Tuesday. I was sitting on the porch, shelling peas, when a black SUV pulled up the gravel driveway. A man in a sharp suit hopped out, carrying a clipboard like a weapon. He didn't look like a neighbor, and he certainly didn't look like he belonged in Oconee County. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice steady despite the sudden chill in my bones. "Mrs. Miller? I'm here for the final walkthrough. Closing is scheduled for Friday," he said, checking his watch as if my life's work was just an appointment on his calendar. "Closing? There must be a mistake. This farm isn't for sale. It's been in the Miller name since the Reconstruction," I replied, standing up so fast the bowl of peas clattered to the floor. He looked confused, then pitying. That's the look people give you when they think your mind is failing because your hair is gray. "Ma'am, Yolanda Miller signed the contract 3 weeks ago. The developers are slated to break ground on the luxury townhomes by the end of the month." "Yolanda, my daughter-in-law," the woman who had been whispering, "Don't worry, Mama Joyce," in my ear while she was stabbing me in the back with a fountain pen. She knew I didn't have the deed. When Silas died suddenly of that heart condition, he hadn't left a will, or so we thought. Everything defaulted to his surviving spouse. I stayed in the main house because she allowed it, or so I thought. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I walked inside, picked up the phone, and called her. "Joyce, is everything okay? I'm right in the middle of a hair appointment." Yolanda answered, her voice dripping with that fake sugar that always made my stomach turn. "There's a man on my porch, Yolanda. He says you sold the farm." "Tell me he's a liar," I said. There was a long pause. The mask finally slipped. "Joyce, let's be realistic. You're 72. You can't manage 600 acres. I've secured a lovely 2-bedroom condo for you in the city. It has an elevator and a security guard. It's for the best. For the best. This is Silas's legacy. You've been in this family for 10 years, and you're ready to pave over his memory for a commission check. It's already done, Joyce. The papers are filed. You have until Sunday to vacate. Don't make this difficult. It would be a shame if I had to involve the sheriff to move your things." The line went dead. My heart was pounding like a war drum. She thought because I was old, I was helpless. She thought because Silas was gone, the fire in this family had gone out. But she forgot one thing. I'm the one who taught Silas how to fight. I grabbed my keys and headed for the courthouse. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew I wasn't leaving until I found a way to burn her plans to the ground. Little did I know, a quiet clerk named Mr. Henderson was about to hand me the match. The Oconee County Courthouse smells like old paper and floor wax, a scent that usually calms me. Today it felt like a tomb. I walked up to the clerk's desk, my sensible shoes clicking against the marble floor. Behind the plexiglass sat Mr. Henderson, a man who had been filing deeds since before Yolanda was even a thought in her mother's head. He looked up from his computer, his spectacles sliding down his nose. "Mrs. Miller, I heard about Silas. I'm so sorry for your loss. He was a good man. Always had a story for me when he came in to pay the property taxes," he said, his voice soft and genuine. "Thank you, Clarence. But I'm not here for sympathy today. I'm here because my daughter-in-law is trying to bulldoze 50 years of my life. She says there's no will, and the land is hers to sell. Tell me there's something she missed," I said, leaning in. My hands were shaking. So I gripped the edge of the counter. Mr. Henderson sighed, a heavy sound that made my stomach drop. Joyce, we looked when Silas first passed. We checked the digital records. Nothing was filed under his name in the last decade. Without a recorded will, the law in South Carolina is pretty clear. The spouse inherits the lion's share, especially since they didn't have children. She's selling to developers Clarence, luxury townhomes. They'll pave over the pond where Silas caught his first base. They'll cut down the oak trees his daddy planted. I whispered. He looked around the quiet office, then beckoned me closer. Listen, Joyce. About 6 months ago, Silas came in here. He didn't go to the digital kiosks. He asked for a private vault box for sensitive family matters. He was acting strange, agitated. He said he didn't trust the cloud and didn't trust certain people in his inner circle. My heart skipped a beat. A vault box? Did he put something in it? He did. But here's the rub. Those boxes are sealed until a formal request is made by the executor. And right now, according to the temporary letters of administration, the executor is Yolanda, he explained. So she has the key? I asked, feeling the walls close in. Technically, yes. But Silas did something clever. He listed you as the secondary contact for emergency retrieval in case of marital dissolution or foul play. Those were his exact words, Joyce. He didn't file it as a will. He filed it as a private trust document. Mr. Henderson disappeared into the back room. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, listening to the hum of the air conditioner. When he returned, he wasn't carrying a folder. He was carrying a dusty, leather-bound ledger and a small, sealed yellow envelope. He told me if anything ever happened to him, and if you came in here looking like the world was ending, I should give you this. It's not the document itself. It's the instructions on how to find it. He knew she'd watch his bank accounts and his lawyer. He didn't put the will in the vault, Joyce. He put the location of the will in the vault. I tore open the envelope. Inside was a single handwritten note from my son. Mama, if you're reading this, it means I was right to be looking over my shoulder. Yolanda isn't who we thought she was. Check the floorboards under the old tractor in the north barn. Not the new one, the 1954 John Deere. I've hidden the truth there. Don't let her sell our soul. I looked at Mr. Henderson. Can you stall the deed transfer? I can flag the title for clerical review for 48 hours. That's all the time I can give you before the developer's lawyers start screaming, he said, winking at me. I didn't head home. I headed to the hardware store. I needed a crowbar and a flashlight. Yolanda thought she was playing a game of checkers, but Silas had left me the pieces for a game of war. If that girl wanted the farm, she was going to have to dig through the dirt she'd spent 10 years trying to stay out of. The north barn felt like a cathedral of rusted iron and memories. The air was thick with the smell of old hay and motor oil, scents that used to mean safety, but now felt like a heavy weight on my chest. I clicked on the heavy-duty flashlight I'd bought, the beam cutting through the darkness like a blade. There she was, the 1954 John Deere. Silas's pride and joy. He'd spent years restoring that tractor, claiming it was the only thing in this world that didn't lie to you. I looked at the note again. Under the floorboards. I dropped to my knees, my 72-year-old joints popping in protest. Hang on, Silas, I whispered into the silence. Mama's here. I began clearing away the decades of grime and straw. My hands were soon stained black with grease, but I didn't care. I shoved the crowbar into a seam in the wood and heaved. The wood groaned, a high-pitched screech that echoed off the metal rafters. One board gave way, then another. Suddenly, the barn doors creaked open. The silhouette of a woman stood framed against the moonlight, her shadow stretching long and thin across the dirt floor. Joyce, what on earth are you doing out here in the dark? It was Yolanda. She was wearing a silk robe and holding a glass of wine, looking every bit the grieving widow who had already spent her inheritance in her head. Just saying goodbye to the equipment. Yolanda, since you're selling it all to the highest bidder, I said, my voice as cold as the steel crowbar in my hand. I stayed positioned over the hole, blocking her view. She stepped inside, her high heels clicking on the packed earth. It's 10 o'clock at night. You're acting erratic. This is exactly why the condo is a better fit for you. You're becoming confused. I'm not confused. I'm disgusted. I snapped. You didn't even wait for the grass to grow over his head before you called the realtors. Did you even love him, or were you just waiting for the heart attack? Yolanda's face hardened. The sweet daughter-in-law act was gone. I spent 10 years in this middle-of-nowhere town, Joyce. I played the dutiful wife. I sat through your Sunday dinners and listened to stories about the land until I wanted to scream. Silas owed me this. This dirt is my paycheck for services rendered. You're a parasite, I said, and you're an interloper, she hissed. The deed is in my name. The bank accounts are mine. Tomorrow, I'm signing the final papers, and Monday morning, the bulldozers arrive. I suggest you go inside and start packing your china. If I find you out here again, I'm calling the police to report a trespasser. She turned on her heel and strutted back toward the house. I waited until I heard the kitchen door slam before I moved. My heart was thundering. I reached into the hole I'd pried open. My fingers brushed against something cold and metallic, a fireproof lockbox. I pulled it out, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't need a key. Silas had scratched a 3-digit code into the side of the tractor's frame months ago. 015, the day he was born. The lid popped open. Inside wasn't just a will. There was a thick manila folder labeled Yolanda. Evidence. My eyes scanned the first page. It wasn't just about the farm. Silas had hired a private investigator before he died. He'd found out Yolanda was already married to a man in Florida when she married my son. She was a bigamist, a fraud, and according to the medical report tucked in the back, Silas hadn't just died of a random heart condition. He'd been microdosing on a herbal supplement that mimicked cardiac distress, something Yolanda had been ordering online for months. My son didn't just leave me a will. He left me a manual on how to destroy the woman who killed him. I sat in the dark of that barn for an hour, the flashlight beam illuminating the proof of a monster. My son didn't just die. He was hunted. Yolanda hadn't been a wife. She was a predator in a floral sundress. My hands, gnarled by 72 years of hard work, didn't shake anymore. They felt like stone. I looked at the clinical reports, the bank transfers to a man named Dante in Miami, and the screenshots of messages where she joked about the old man's ticking clock. The rage that rose up in me wasn't hot. It was a deep sub-zero chill. I didn't call the sheriff. Not yet. If I called the law now, the lawyers would get involved, and she'd find a way to tie this up in court for years while she lived off the insurance money. No, I wanted her to feel the floor drop out from under her just like she did to me. I tucked the folder under my arm and walked back to the main house. The lights were off in Yolanda's wing, but I could hear her muffled laughter through the vents. She was on the phone, likely picking out the interior of her new penthouse with my son's blood money. I went to my kitchen, the kitchen where I'd taught her how to make Silas's favorite peach cobbler, and I sat at the table. I pulled out a fresh legal pad. I needed a plan that didn't just stop the sale. I needed a plan that stripped her of every cent, every dignity, and every breath of freedom she thought she'd bought. The next morning, I was waiting for her in the foyer. I'd washed the grease from my hands and put on my Sunday best. I looked like a defeated old woman. Going somewhere, Joyce? Yolanda asked, swinging her designer handbag. She was dressed for the closing, all white like she was some kind of innocent bride. I'm going to the bank, Yolanda, to see about my savings. I suppose I'll need it for the move, I said, my voice trembling just enough to make her smirk. Smart move. Maybe you can find a nice assisted living facility. They have bingo on Tuesdays. She laughed, heading for the door. Don't be here when I get back. The movers will be here at noon to clear out your clutter. I watched her drive away in the Mercedes Silas had bought her for their anniversary. As soon as her taillights faded, I picked up the phone. My first call wasn't to a lawyer. It was to the county clerk's office. Mr. Henderson, it's Joyce. I found it, but I need you to do me one more favor. Is the developer's attorney there yet? Good. Tell him there's a discrepancy in the title, something about an undisclosed heir and a criminal background check on the seller. Tell him to wait. I'm on my way. My second call was to a private number Silas had listed in the folder. A man named Andre, the investigator. Mr. Andre, this is Silas Miller's mother. I have the folder. I need you to meet me at the courthouse in 20 minutes. And bring the police officer you mentioned, the one who handles the fraud division. When I pulled into the courthouse parking lot, I saw Yolanda's Mercedes parked right up front. She was probably inside, sipping expensive water and dreaming of her new life. She didn't see me walk in the side entrance. She didn't see the 3 men in suits waiting in the shadows of the hallway. I walked into the closing room. The developers were there. The bank reps were there, and Yolanda was sitting at the head of the table, pen in hand. What are you doing here, Joyce? I told you it was over. Yolanda hissed, her eyes darting toward the door. Oh, it's over, Yolanda, I said, pulling a chair out and sitting directly opposite her. But not for me. Why don't you tell these gentlemen about your first husband, Dante? I hear he's quite upset you never officially ended things before you married my son. The color drained from her face so fast, I thought she might faint. The pen hit the mahogany table with a loud thud. The silence in the room was so thick you could hear the hum of the overhead lights. Yolanda's hand hovered over the table, her fingers twitching near the contract she was seconds away from signing. The developer, a man named Mr. Sterling, looked from me to Yolanda, his brow furrowed. Mrs. Miller? What is she talking about? He asked, his voice sharp with the suspicion of a man about to lose a multi-million-dollar deal. Yolanda let out a forced, high-pitched laugh. She's 72 and grieving Mr. Sterling. She's had a very hard time since Silas passed. Joyce, honey, why don't we go outside and get you some water? You're clearly confused. I didn't move an inch. I pulled the manila folder from my bag and slid a photocopied document across the polished wood. It was a marriage certificate from Dade County, Florida, dated 3 years before she ever met my son. There was no record of a divorce. I'm not the one who's confused, Yolanda. I'm the one who's been doing my homework, I said, my voice as steady as the mountain air. This is a bigamy case, Mr. Sterling, which means her marriage to my son was never legal. And if the marriage wasn't legal, she has zero claim to this estate. She's not his widow. She's a stranger who's been trespassing in my house. Yolanda's face went from pale to a mottled, angry red. That's a lie. That document is a fake. You're just a bitter old woman who can't stand that your son loved me more than you. Is that so? I asked. Then maybe you can explain this. I flipped to the next page, the bank records showing the monthly payments to Dante. You've been paying your real husband hush money for 3 years using my son's hard-earned cash. And look at the dates, Mr. Sterling. The payments doubled the week after Silas died. It looks a lot like a reward, doesn't it? Mr. Sterling pushed his chair back, his face darkening. Hold on. If there's a title dispute and a potential criminal investigation, this closing is off. My firm doesn't touch dirty land. You can't do that. Yolanda screamed. finally losing her cool. She lunged for the contract, trying to grab it, but the developer's assistant was faster. He snatched the papers away and stepped back. "I can and I am," Sterling snapped. "In fact, I'm calling our legal team to see if we can sue you for the costs of the due diligence. You lied on your affidavit of heirship." Yolanda turned on me, her eyes full of a venom I'd never seen before. She looked like she wanted to wrap her hands around my throat right there in the courthouse. "You think you've won? You're an old hag with a pile of dirt. I'll tie this up in court until you're dead and buried. I still have the keys to that house, and I'll burn it to the ground before I let you have it back." Actually, a new voice boomed from the doorway. It was Detective Vance, the man Andre had brought with him. He was leaning against the doorframe, his badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. Two uniformed officers stood behind him. "Mrs. Yolanda Miller, or should I say Yolanda Simmons, you need to step away from the table," Detective Vance said, walking into the room. "We've been reviewing the toxicology reports Silas's mother provided. It seems the herbal supplements found in your bedside table match the ones that caused your husband's fatal heart arrhythmia. We also have a statement from a Mr. Dante Simmons in Miami. He's been very talkative since we told him he could be charged as an accessory to murder." Yolanda's knees buckled. She didn't look like a high society widow anymore. She looked like a trapped animal. "Dante wouldn't, he promised." "He promised to stay quiet as long as the money kept coming," the detective said, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "The money stopped today. Turn around." As the metal ratcheted shut around her wrists, Yolanda looked at me, tears of rage streaming down her face. "I hate you," she hissed. I stood up, smoothed out my skirt, and looked her right in the eye. "I don't think about you at all, Yolanda. I'm too busy thinking about what Silas would want me to do with the north pasture." As the echo of the handcuffs died down, the room felt lighter, as if a poison had finally been sucked out of the air. I watched them lead Yolanda out of the courthouse in tears. She wasn't crying because she felt sorry for Silas. She was crying because she'd lost her meal ticket. She'd spent years treating our family history like a bargain bin. And now she was the one being discarded. Mr. Sterling, the developer, looked at me with a mix of awe and embarrassment. He cleared his throat and adjusted his tie. "Mrs. Miller, I had no idea. My firm prides itself on integrity. If we had known the seller was, well, a criminal bigamist, we never would have initiated the purchase." "I know how developers work, Mr. Sterling," I said, tucking my son's folder back into my bag. "You see land, you see dollar signs. You don't see the sweat that went into the soil. But now that we've cleared up who actually owns the Miller estate, I think it's time you and your blueprints found another county to pave over." "Now, wait a minute, Joyce," he said, his tone shifting into that smooth, persuasive salesman voice. "The contract Yolanda signed is void, yes, but I'm still prepared to offer you the same price. $10 million. That's enough to live like a queen for the rest of your days. You could travel, buy a mansion in Florida, and never have to shell another pea in your life." I looked at him, and for a second I thought about what $10 million could do. It could buy a lot of comfort, but comfort doesn't replace the sound of the wind through the Miller pines. It doesn't replace the sight of the sunrise hitting the barn roof. "Mr. Sterling," I said, standing tall, "I'm 72 years old. I've lived through the Great Depression's shadows. I've buried a husband, and I've buried a son. I don't need a mansion in Florida. I need my home. And my home isn't for sale. Not today, not tomorrow, and not when I'm gone. I'll be setting up a land trust so that this farm stays green long after you and I are both dust." He sighed, knowing he'd lost. "You're a stubborn woman, Joyce Miller." "I'm a Miller woman," I corrected him. "There's a difference." I walked out of that courthouse and into the bright South Carolina sun. I felt Silas with me. For the first time since his funeral, I didn't feel like I was drowning in grief. I felt like I was on a mission, but the work wasn't done. Yolanda was in a cell, but her influence was still all over my house. I drove back to the farm, but I didn't go to the main house. I went to the small cottage at the edge of the property where our caretaker, a man named Sterling, no relation to the developer, lived. He'd worked for us for 30 years, and Yolanda had fired him the day after Silas died. Sterling! I called out, knocking on his door. He stepped out, looking surprised. Mrs. Miller? I heard things were moving fast with the sale. The sale is dead, Sterling. And so is Yolanda's time on this land. I need you back. I need the locks changed on every building, and I need the tractor moved back into the shed. We've got work to do. He grinned, a wide, honest smile. I'll get my tools, ma'am. As I walked back toward the main house, I saw the sold sign leaning against the fence. I didn't just pull it out of the ground. I kicked it. I felt a surge of energy I hadn't felt in decades. But as I reached the porch, I noticed something. The front door was wide open. I hadn't left it that way. I gripped the strap of my handbag, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I knew I should have waited for Sterling to get his tools, but this was my house. I hadn't spent 50 years defending this threshold to be intimidated by an open door. I stepped onto the porch, the floorboards creaking under my feet. A familiar sound that usually felt like a welcome, but now felt like a warning. Who's in there? I called out, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through me. No answer. Only the low hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I stepped into the foyer. The house felt violated. Yolanda's expensive perfumes still hung in the air, a cloying scent that made me want to gag. I walked toward the study, and that's when I heard it, the sound of drawers being slammed and paper tearing. I pushed the door open. Standing there was a man I'd only seen in grainy surveillance photos from Silas's folder. He was younger than me, maybe in his late 50s, wearing a loud silk shirt and enough gold chains to anchor a boat. You must be Joyce, he said, not even looking up as he rifled through Silas's desk. I'm Dante. I believe my wife owes me a very large sum of money, and since she's currently detained, I've come to collect the collateral. You're a thief and a bigamist. Dante, you have exactly 10 seconds to get out of my house before I show you how we handle intruders in Oconee County, I said, reaching into my bag. I didn't have a weapon, but he didn't know that. I gripped my heavy brass keychain like a knuckle duster. Dante laughed, an oily, arrogant sound. Now, Joyce, let's be reasonable. Yolanda promised me a cut of the development deal. $5 million to keep my mouth shut about our little marriage in Florida. Now that the deal is dead, I'm looking at a lot of wasted time. I know there's a safe in this house. Give me the code, and I'll be on a plane back to Miami before sunset. The only thing you're getting is a one-way trip to the same jail they're holding your wife in. I snapped. He stopped tossing papers and turned toward me, his eyes narrowing. He was a bully, used to intimidating people with his size and his sneer. He took a step toward me, trying to loom over me. Listen, old lady, I don't have time for your grandmotherly lectures. My life is on the line. People in Florida are waiting for their money. Now give me the code, or things are going to get very unpleasant for you. I didn't flinch. I faced down rogue bulls and survived hurricanes. A man in a silk shirt wasn't going to break me. You think you're the first predator to come sniffing around this land? You're nothing but a scavenger. You and Yolanda thought you could pick the meat off our bones because we were old. But you forgot that old trees have the deepest roots. Dante reached out to grab my arm, but I was faster than I looked. I swung my heavy handbag with everything I had, the weight of my son's evidence folder, and my brass keys connecting squarely with his temple. He staggered back, swearing loudly, his hand flying to the side of his head. "You crazy old! I'm the woman whose son you helped kill." I screamed, the grief and rage finally boiling over. I didn't wait for him to recover. I grabbed the heavy glass paperweight from the desk, the one Silas had bought me at a craft fair when he was 10, and I held it high. "Get out! Get out of my house before I do something the law will have to forgive me for." Just then, the sound of gravel crunching outside signaled the arrival of help. Sterling had arrived, and he hadn't come alone. Two of our neighbors, men who had known Silas since he was in diapers, were right behind him, carrying work tools and looking for a fight. Dante looked at me, then at the window, seeing the reinforcements. He realized the helpless widow act was a myth. He didn't say another word. He shoved past me, nearly knocking me over, and bolted out the back door toward the woods. "Sterling! He's headed for the creek." I shouted. I leaned against the desk, my breath coming in gasps. My house was a mess, my son was gone, and a killer was on the run. But as I looked down at the paperweight in my hand, I knew one thing for certain. The Miller farm was still standing. And so was I. The adrenaline was still humming in my veins as I watched Sterling and the neighbors vanish into the tree line. Dante thought he could outrun men who knew every dip, creek, and briar patch in this county. He was wearing city shoes and a silk shirt. He wouldn't last 20 minutes in the Oconee brush. I didn't sit down to rest. I picked up the telephone and called the sheriff's office again. "Sheriff, this is Joyce Miller. Dante Simmons is on foot heading toward the North Creek. He's dangerous, and he's desperate. He just tried to assault me in my own study." While the sirens began to wail in the distance, I turned my attention back to the room. The mess Dante had made was a blessing in disguise. In his frantic search for the safe, he'd ripped the back panel off Silas's roll-top desk. I knelt down, my knees clicking, and spotted a small, dark blue ledger that had been tucked into a hidden compartment. I opened it. This wasn't a business ledger. It was Silas's private diary from the last 6 months of his life. My eyes blurred as I read his handwriting. March 12th. Yolanda thinks I don't notice the bitter taste in my tea. She's been spending more time in the guest wing on business calls. I checked the phone logs. She's calling a Florida number 3 times a day. I feel my heart skipping beats, and it isn't from the stress of the farm. I think she's trying to finish me. My heart broke all over again. He knew. My boy knew he was being poisoned, and he spent his final days making sure I'd be protected. He wasn't just hiding a will. He was building a cage for her. He'd even taped a small micro SD card to the back of the ledger. I took the card to the kitchen and slotted it into my laptop. A video file popped up. It was a recording from a hidden camera Silas had installed in the pantry. In the video, Yolanda was standing at the counter, her face cold and calculated. She was opening a capsule and pouring a white powder into Silas's evening smoothie. She did it with the same casualness someone would use to season a soup. "You monster," I whispered to the empty kitchen. The screen showed her checking her reflection in the microwave door, smoothing her hair, and putting on a concerned smile before carrying the glass into the living room. It was the smoking gun the detectives needed. Bigamy was one thing, but premeditated murder caught on tape? That was a one-way ticket to the needle. A loud shout from the back pasture drew me to the window. Sterling and the others were coming back, dragging a mud-caked, scratched-up Dante between them. He looked like he'd been dragged through a hedge backward. His gold chains were gone, likely lost in the creek, and his arrogance had been replaced by a look of pure terror. The sheriff's cruiser pulled into the yard, dust billowing behind it. Detective Vance stepped out, looking at the mess of a man the neighbors had delivered. "Nice work, fellas," Vance said, turning to Dante. Mr. Simmons, you're under arrest for burglary, assault, and as an accessory to the murder of Silas Miller. You have the right to remain silent. Though I imagine you'll start singing once you realize Yolanda is already blaming the whole thing on you. Dante looked at me, his lip curling. You should have just given me the money, Joyce. Now we're all going down. No, Dante, I said, leaning over the porch railing. You and your wife are going down. I'm staying right here on the Miller land, and the only thing I'm giving you is a front row seat to your own destruction. As the cruiser pulled away, the silence of the farm returned. But it wasn't a lonely silence anymore. It was the silence of a house that had been purged. I walked back inside, the blue ledger tucked under my arm. There was one more person I needed to deal with before this was over, Yolanda's lawyer. By the next morning, the local news was buzzing. The Black Widow of Oconee was the headline on everyone's lips. I didn't care about the fame. I cared about the finish line. I sat in my kitchen, wearing Silas's old flannel shirt for strength, as a silver sedan pulled into the driveway. Out stepped Mr. Harrison, the high-priced attorney Yolanda had hired to manage the estate. He looked like he'd spent the night looking for a loophole and failed. He walked into my house with a briefcase, but he didn't have that smug look anymore. He looked like a man standing on a sinking ship. Mrs. Miller, he began, clearing his throat. I've reviewed the new evidence provided by the sheriff. Given the complications with my client's marital status and the pending capital charges, I am here to formally withdraw the eviction notice and the sale contract. Sit down, Mr. Harrison, I said. I didn't offer him tea. I didn't offer him a smile. I laid the micro SD card and a copy of the bigamy certificate on the table. You're not just here to withdraw a notice. You're here to sign over the keys to the accounts Yolanda froze. And you're going to do it now. Or I'm going to tell the Bar Association how you attempted to facilitate the sale of a property under a fraudulent title. Now, Joyce, I was merely acting on the information provided by my client. You were acting on greed. I interrupted. You saw an old woman and an empty farm and thought it was an easy payday. You didn't do your due diligence because you didn't think I mattered. Well, I matter. This land matters. And if you don't sign these release forms, I will make sure your career is as dead as Yolanda's social life. His hands shook as he pulled the documents from his briefcase. He'd realized that I wasn't just defending a farm. I was dismantling a conspiracy. He signed the papers, transferring every cent of the Miller estate back into my name as the sole legal heir. Is that all? He asked, standing up and looking toward the door. One more thing, I said. I want Yolanda's belongings out of this house by noon. Tell her family to come get her clothes and her shoes. Anything left after 12 o'clock is going into a bonfire in the north pasture. I want every trace of that woman burned out of my life. As he scurried away, I felt a weight lift off the rafters of the house. I spent the next 4 hours with Sterling purging the guest wing. We didn't just pack bags. We cleared out the darkness. We found hidden jewelry she'd bought with Silas's money and designer bags she'd hidden in the back of the closet. I didn't keep a single thing. Every item she'd touched felt tainted. At exactly 12:01 p.m., I stood by a small fire near the barn. I watched as the last of her silk scarves turned to ash. The wind caught the smoke and carried it away out over the fields that would never be townhomes. The phone rang. It was Detective Vance. Joyce, we just got the word from the DA. They're seeking the death penalty for Yolanda Miller. Dante turned state's evidence to save his own skin, but it doesn't matter. The video you found is the nail in the coffin. She's going away, Joyce. For good. I hung up the phone and walked out to the porch. For the first time in months, I could hear the birds. I could smell the damp earth of a South Carolina spring. I was 72 years old, and I was finally at peace. But there was one final thing Silas wanted me to do, a legacy that would ensure no one ever tried to take this land again. The sun began to set over the Oconee Hills, painting the sky in shades of deep violet and gold. I sat on the porch swing, the very spot where Yolanda had tried to sentence me to a life in a concrete box. In my hand, I held the final document Silas had prepared, the one that would ensure the Miller name was synonymous with something greater than a tragedy. The next morning, the town square was crowded. I had called a meeting with the local agricultural board and the county council. Even Mr. Sterling, the developer, was there looking curious. I stood on the courthouse steps, the same place where I'd watched Yolanda be led away in shame. I've spent 50 years on the Miller farm. I told the crowd, my voice clear and carrying across the lawn. My son Silas loved this dirt more than his own life. Greedy people tried to pave over that love. They tried to turn our heritage into a profit margin. But they forgot that the land doesn't belong to us. We belong to the land. I held up the new deed. As of today, the Miller estate is no longer a private farm. I have officially signed 500 acres into a permanent agricultural land trust. It will be the Silas Miller Memorial Youth Farm. It will be a place where the children of this county can learn to plant, to harvest, and to respect the earth. It can never be sold, never be subdivided, and never be paved. The silence was broken by a roar of applause that brought tears to my eyes. Neighbors I hadn't seen in years came up to hug me. I saw Mr. Henderson from the clerk's office winking at me from the back. The developers walked away, their blueprints useless, their greed defeated by a 72-year-old woman with a crowbar and a mother's heart. Later that afternoon, I visited the prison. I didn't have to go, but I needed to close the book. I sat behind the glass, waiting. When Yolanda was let out, she looked haggard. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a rough orange jumpsuit. Her hair was lank, and the arrogance had finally been replaced by a hollow, haunting fear. "You look like you've finally realized that silk doesn't keep you warm in a cell," I said quietly. "You ruined everything," she hissed, her voice cracking. "I could have had it all. We could have both been rich." "I am rich, Yolanda," I replied. "I have my son's memory. I have the respect of my neighbors. And I have the peace of knowing you will never see a sunrise that isn't framed by iron bars." Dante told them everything. He told them how you laughed when Silas's heart started to fail. That laughter is going to cost you your life. I stood up to leave. She hammered on the glass, screaming insults that no longer had the power to hurt me. As I walked out of that prison and into the fresh air, I felt the final cord snap. She was a ghost now, haunting a cage of her own making. I drove back to the farm and walked out to the north barn. Sterling had already started clearing the brush for the new youth garden. I climbed onto the 1954 John Deere and patted the warm metal. "We did it, Silas," I whispered. "The land is safe." I looked out over the fields. The Miller legacy wasn't just in the dirt. It was in the justice we'd fought for. I was Joyce Miller, 72 years old, and I had protected my home. The predators were gone. The secrets were out. And for the first time in a long time, the harvest looked beautiful. Justice has finally been served, and Silas can rest in peace knowing his mother and his land are safe forever. Yolanda got exactly what she deserved. Did you enjoy this story? Tell us in the comments what your favorite part was. If you want more stories, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe to Vintage Vengeance, and share this video with everyone who loves a happy ending. Don't forget to hit the bell so you never miss our next gripping saga. Thanks for watching.